Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold.
Show you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome back to The Download. I'm Jill Marshall and today I want to talk about one of my favourite things in the world, books. But not just the books I've written or the ones sitting on your shelves. I want to talk about the book itself as a form, a portal, a shapeshifter. Because if you're anything like me, you might have noticed that we're living in a time where the very idea of a book is in question. Is it the smell of old paper, the heft of a hardback, the crack of a spine? Or is it a voice in your ear on a long walk? Or words scrolling up the screen while you snuggle with a child at bedtime? I've been thinking about this for a long time. In fact, I first dipped my toe into digital publishing way back about 15 years ago when I first put out a book on Smashwords, actually long before Kindle had become a household name. At the time, people thought I was slightly mad. Who was ever going to want to read on a screen? And yet here we are in 2025 with ebooks, audiobooks, serializations, even TikTok driving the bestseller lists. Now, admittedly, there's something sacred about the physical book. And I'll always be a traditionalist in some ways. That weight of a novel in your hands, the act of turning a page, the way certain books become talismans on a shelf. They hold memory as much as story. That inscription from a friend or the folded corner that you put over a favourite passage, the battered cover from being read over and over. But then there's the other side, the screen, the sound, the new ways of engaging with words. Now, I'll admit, I struggled with audiobooks at first. I'm a very fast reader, and narrators just couldn't keep up with me. It drove me nuts. But then I discovered you could speed them up, and suddenly a whole new world opened up. Now I can race through a novel while I'm walking or sink into non-fiction while cooking dinner or microwaving dinner. The experience is different, yes, but no less rich. Form shapes the experience. Yes, reading Pride and Prejudice in a 19th century cloth-bound edition is not the same as hearing it read by Rosamund Pike on Audible, but both are valid. Both are books. What about children and reading books? What I think the real concern is for children isn't so much whether they're holding a paperback or a tablet. It's that many of them aren't reading for pleasure at all. And that's what makes the difference. When a child reads for pleasure, they read more. They dive deeper, linger longer, they get lost in words. And it's the volume of reading, that invisible immersion, that builds literacy, almost without anyone noticing. So maybe the answer is to expand what reading for pleasure actually means. For my grandson, it's Bluey, Bluey and more Bluey, whether on screen, in picture book form, or through story time via play and stagecraft. For other kids, it might be Kids Time Story Time on YouTube. It certainly is for my grandson, where they're following along with words and voices, and the narrator, the actual storyteller, is embellishing the story somewhat. Or it might be initiatives like the Doorstep Library, where volunteers literally knock on doors with a backpack of books and a little stool, and they make reading an event for the whole family, something embodied, shared and exciting. So if pleasure is the key, then our job as adults, educators, parents, grandparents, is not to police the format, but to cultivate the joy, the delight. Because once a child associates reading with pleasure, surely the mechanics will follow, and that's when literacy blooms. Of course, publishing itself keeps evolving. Right now, Greta Gerwig of Barbie and Little Women fame is adapting the Chronicles of Narnia for Netflix, starting with The Magician's Nephew, which has always been one of my favourites. That's another form, the book transmuting into film, or a global cultural event into a gateway for millions of new readers. This blurring of form is something I noticed years ago when I was going into schools to do book talks. Without fail, I'd be asked, when will Jane Blonde be a film or a TV series? and that would always be followed up with, "Can I be in it?" Kids weren't actually distinguishing between the page and the screen. For them, story was story, and they wanted to live inside it, however it came. And speaking of Jane Blonde on screen, I've had some very funny discussions over the years about who would play her, but actually who would play especially her outrageous mentor, G Mama. When I first started writing her, I had someone in mind. Later, when I was in my first film option discussions with a producer, who, funnily enough, was also behind the Chronicles of Narnia films, I suggested this lesser-known actress from the Gilmore Girls. Her name was Melissa McCarthy. A few years later, when I was chatting with the Oscar-winning animators who were developing Jane Blonde, I threw out another name, Jennifer Coolidge. She wasn't exactly a household name then either, but we know how that turned out. So apparently, I'm pretty good at spotting hidden talent. My latest tip for G-Mother, if anyone's interested, would be Rose Matafeo, a fellow Kiwi, comedic, brilliant, and every bit as wild on screen as she is as a writer. Just imagine her in a platinum wig with a handbag full of gadgets, maybe one day. I also remember one time asking a group of children who had read Harry Potter, and straight away they asked me back, "Do you mean the book or the film book?" For many of them, there was no hierarchy. The book and the movie weren't separate categories. They were just different ways of enjoying the same universe. Admittedly, fandom can get complicated. Take The Thursday Murder Club, dare I mention it. Readers adored Richard Osman's cozy crime novels, but when the film came out on Netflix just recently, many were quite disappointed. Not necessarily because it was a film, but because the adaptation had changed too much for the die-hard fan. Characters' arcs, subplots, the flavour of the story. It didn't feel like their Thursday Murder Club. And the same happened with Harry Potter. Even while children blurred the line between book and film book, fans argued over the subplots that never made it to the screen. That's the tension of adaptation. It's not just about form, book or film, but about whether the story we carry in our heads and hearts survives the journey across. When it doesn't, there's possibly a sense of betrayal. And when it does, there's joy in seeing a beloved archetype or world take on new life. Back in 2010-11, we were worried that Wattpad would destroy the industry. Instead, it launched careers. Now we have Book Talk on TikTok, where a video of someone crying over a novel can catapult that book into bestsellerdom. We have Substack serializations harking back to Victorian installments of Dickens. We have AI narration and interactive ebooks. The book is no longer confined to the bookshelf. It flows across media, across platforms, across senses. And maybe that's always been the case. Let's face it, Homer's epics were oral long before they were written. Dickens was performed aloud in drawing rooms. Audiobooks, screen readings, TikTok dramatics. They're not a break from tradition as such. They're a continuation of it. So perhaps the question is not what's the future of the book, but what is a book, really? Is it paper and ink? Is it sound waves in your ears? Is it a shared story around a campfire, or a serial on Wattpad, or a Netflix adaptation? To me, a book is a vessel for story. It's a container for human imagination, wisdom, play, longing. And containers change shape. Clay tablets, scrolls, codices, paperbacks, Kindles, podcasts. The essence of them doesn't change. We tell stories, we pass them on, we shape our worlds through them and by them. And maybe this is where my Jungian episodes bleed into this one after all, because books are archetypes in themselves. They are whatever stories, endlessly morphing, endlessly reappearing in new guises. So let's sit with that for a moment, the idea that books themselves are archetypes. I've come to believe that every book probably reflects the archetypes alive in its author, but it doesn't stop there. A book also connects with the archetypes alive in its reader, and that's part of the magic, part of the pleasure of reading. We don't just encounter characters, we encounter ourselves. Take Jane Blonde. On the surface, it's a fun, sparkly spy caper. But underneath, she carries the archetypes of the adventurer, the magician, the orphan, the introvert. When children read her, they're not just following a plot. They're connecting with those archetypes within themselves. Their own explorer wakes up. Their own heroine stretches her wings. Or think of Harry Potter. Yes, it's fantasy, but it's also the archetype of the orphan again, or the every child, called into the hero's journey. Millions of young and not so young readers stepped into that pattern, trying it on for size, rehearsing their own passage into courage, loyalty, sacrifice, friendship, love. Even Bluey, which might seem like charming cartoons, is rich with archetypes. The trickster, the innocent, the caregiver, the parents to aspire to be, the wise child. Kids aren't just giggling at Bluey's antics. They're learning about themselves through those universal roles. And in adult fiction, the archetypes often go darker. We find the shadow, the outcast, the unrequited lover, the wounded healer. Books let us walk into those patterns without having to live them directly. We get to explore the terrain of our inner lives at a safe distance. Now, this isn't just me being mystical. Psychology and literary studies back it up. Jung proposed that archetypes are universal patterns in the collective unconscious, and that myths and stories are one of the main ways they surface. Narrative psychologists say we make sense of our lives through story, and books give us the frameworks to build identity. Reader response theory, scholars like Wolfgang Iser, remind us that meaning doesn't live solely in the text. It's co-created between the book and the reader. And that's the key. Archetypes come alive in the relationship. They're not frozen in print. They awaken when someone meets them on the page, or in the voice of an audiobook, or in the moving image of a film, whether animated or live action. This, I think, is why people will say, that book changed my life, and I've had that said to me. Not because of the paper or the font, but because it activated something archetypal they were ready for. The warrior, the seeker, the rebel. And it's why books endure, because formats may change. Print, Kindle, podcast, TikTok. But archetypes don't. They're our eternal language. And maybe that's the most reassuring thing about all of this, because if books are archetypes in motion, living vessels of timeless patterns, then they're never really at risk of disappearing. Formats will change, for sure. They always have. But the underlying patterns are eternal, and they'll keep finding their way into whatever containers we create. That's why, whether it's a battered paperback, a streamed series, or a Bluey episode on an iPad, there's still that spark of recognition, that inner yes. It reminds us that what we're really engaging with isn't just entertainment. It's something older, deeper, universal, and personal. So, the future of the book, I think it's wide open. I don't believe books are dying. I believe they're proliferating, expanding, infiltrating every form they can find. And that's something to celebrate, not fear. Next time you pick up a paperback, or listen to a podcasted story, or watch your child swipe through a digital picture book, notice what's happening. The form may be new, but the magic is ancient. And perhaps ask yourself, which archetype is this book stirring in me right now? Which hidden part of me is leaning forward to listen or take part? I'd love to hear how you engage with books these days. Do you cling to print? Do you live through audiobooks? Do you scroll stories on your phone at midnight? Drop me a line and let's keep this conversation going. Because one thing I know for sure, whatever shape they take, stories aren't going anywhere. They are ours forever. Thanks for tuning in to the Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment and share and all of that good stuff. Also, I'd love to hear more about your own intuitive hits and downloads. So do find us on Facebook, YouTube and more.